Hey guys, what's up? I'm your host, the J-Man. Welcome to my video today. This is going to be a little discussion on Marvel Comics. Who knows, it might turn into quite a lengthy discussion, but I want to talk about Marvel Comics here. As a company, a hugely, widely successful company, you know, they've been in business for a really long time. I mean, longer than 1963. Yeah, that's like, you know, going on, let's see, more than 40 years, 50 years almost. Long time. And their characters are so widely renowned. Like, I mean, who hasn't heard of Spider-Man? Who hasn't heard of the Incredible Hulk? I mean, they transcend all forms of media. So comic books are clearly a part of society. Yeah. Marvel Comics, I'm going to argue that Marvel Comics has become quite a bit more popular than DC Comics. Even though DC Comics has their standouts like Batman, which, you know, Batman is probably really the biggest, most popular, recognized comic book character of all time. And second would probably be Superman, and third might be Spider-Man, something like that, close to that. But where was I going with this? Oh yeah, Marvel Comics, they're huge, okay? But we look at their actual source material. It all goes back to the very source, the root of what they do. They are publishers. They write stories, okay? If for some reason the stories stop selling, if the comic books themselves stop selling, Marvel is going to hurt. They're going to suffer big time, okay? Because that's their main focus. That's the root of the very core of their existence, are the comic books. So if the comic book starts suffering, the company itself and all the other stuff that the company outputs, like merchandising, is going to suffer too. Okay. So, having said that, I want to take a look at these comic books that Marvel is producing. And, you know, I was talking to the Senior Vice President of Publishing, Tom Brevoort, and he's got the website online. He's got the site. I'll try to provide a link to it at the bottom, but this website, he's just taking questions from anybody, random questions. You don't even have to sign up for the website. You don't have to log in. You just type in a question, post it, and it goes to Brevoort. So he has a choice whether or not to answer it or not, but he's answering a ton of questions. But, you know, it's Tom Brevoort, so he's going to be kind of elusive in his question answering, you know, kind of like a politician would. But I think for the most part, he tends to get the job done. He tends to answer the questions and not really confuse people too much. But it depends. Like, it depends on what question you ask him. Like, if you, and I've noticed there's a lot of questions regarding Spider-Man, regarding One More Day, the marriage to Mary Jane, and if you put any of those questions on him, he tends to kind of repeat himself. You know, it's like this political statement that he has prepared, and you know, that's kind of, I think, Marvel's standpoint as a whole. You go to the top of the ladder, top of the executive ladder. We have Joe Quesada, the chief, and he's the one that it was his decision to do One More Day. Basically, he wrote it. It was his idea, and he was the biggest how should I say this, supporter of breaking up Peter Parker and Mary Jane, and the whole Mephisto thing and all of that, having Spider-Man be young again. You know, so I think he kind of instilled this idea or this ideology in the company, and that anyone else in the company is kind of afraid to go against his position. So you're going to get the same answer over and over. But regarding Spider-Man and, well, Peter Parker, really, Peter Parker and Mary Jane's marriage, the whole One More Day storyline, I was asking Tom Brevoort about that, and More specifically, when it comes to character progression, character development, Marvel doesn't seem to understand this idea. They don't employ this tactic. It's not really even a tactic. They don't use it in their writing, and it's just totally, it's confusing to me how a company could go against something like that. It's just a natural. It's obvious. It should be obvious that if you're writing a story about a character, the character should make progress. You should come to realizations. You should have a climax and a resolution. And Marvel doesn't do that necessarily. They have their characters, like, I don't know, I asked him, I said, you know, why is Marvel against passing the torch? And what I was talking about was, let's say you have Peter Parker as Spider-Man, right? Peter Parker can't be Spider-Man forever. If you want to continue telling Spider-Man stories, you need to find someone else to be Spider-Man, because it's not believable that a single character can be, you know, between ages 20 and 20, between ages, let's say, 16 and 28. You can't be between those ages for decades and decades and decades. It's just not believable. Alright, so if you go back and you look at that, you say, why can't Marvel just pass the torch, allow somebody else to become Spider-Man, and that way you can continue telling Spider-Man stories? His answer to me was basically that because Marvel, unlike a lot of other companies, tells stories about the character rather than the person inside the suit. He says that's why we don't pass the torch, because it's not about the actual costume itself, it's not about the title itself, it's about the person. And I'm like, okay, I'm thinking, yeah, but the title of the book is Amazing Spider-Man, not The Adventures of Peter Parker. So I'm like, we see more of the guy in the costume. We hear more of the name Spider-Man rather than we do Peter Parker. You promote Spider-Man, you don't promote necessarily Peter Parker. People's interest lies in Spider-Man, in the fact that he has superpowers and fights villains. People's interests don't necessarily lie in Peter Parker. I mean, fans of Spider-Man, who are longtime readers, yes, of course, they're interested in Peter Parker. That's where they find out. That's where the real drama and the real interesting stories come from, is Peter Parker's everyday life. But fans in general like Spider-Man. The appeal is the character Spider-Man, not necessarily Peter Parker. So my whole take is, why can't you have another character become Spider-Man, another character very similar to Peter, and make him just as interesting and just as, you know, complicated as Peter Parker? And then that way you can have your story about your character rather than the person in the costume, rather than just the costume itself. But I don't think Marvel is able to see that. So the problem that Marvel has is, okay, they write fiction stories, right? But just because it's fiction doesn't mean it's free for all. Doesn't mean anything goes. Doesn't mean we can throw all of our understanding of time and space out the window. No, you still have rules to follow. You still have a literary structure, which means if you're writing about a character, the character has to develop. He has to evolve. If he has, for instance, if he's facing a problem near the beginning of the story, he needs to go through process and steps to try and solve the problem, and then eventually you get to the point where, wow, I found out how to do it, I'm able to solve my problems and move forward, and move on to the next thing. You know, but that never really happens in Marvel Comics. They don't build towards a climax. And you can argue with me and say that, yeah, they do build towards a climax, but what you're talking about is individual stories, individual issues, individual episodes. I'm talking about as a whole. It doesn't. If you look at all the stories, line them up, put them together, they don't build towards a climax. They don't have a universal sense of progression. They're all just kind of like looping. It's all it's one big story loop, and then I don't see how that type of writing can appeal, and I'm not a fan of it, and I don't understand how they're able to publish something without following the literary structure. In any other media, a story that just loops would not be acceptable. It would be frowned upon, discouraged. And I think that's one of the biggest stigmas, or the biggest reason why comic books are looked down upon on upper society. And comic books will kind of have all this, comic books will have this negative connotation of being like something just for children, or something that is silly and just not to be as critically acclaimed as like a prize-winning novel. And I think that if we really want to break that boundary and say that comic books are just as good as novels and award-winning films and things like that, we need to get past this idea of having ageless characters, having characters that do not age, that do not progress. So, in my opinion, Marvel has got this backwards thinking, and I think it's kind of like ignorant on their part. So, yeah, I just wanted to share that with you guys. Hopefully you understand what I'm talking about. I'd love to hear your opinions, so please comment, and thanks for watching.